Good evening, everyone. So I know it's been a while since we've been here for the Bible study specifically. So for you remember, we're now at David, and Saul is actively trying to kill David at this time, and now he's kind of on the run. So we're going to start seeing David on the run for these next couple chapters and how he lives in exile. So we're going to start in chapter 20. So David fled from Naioth in Ramah. He came before Jonathan and said, "What have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin against your father, that he is trying to take my life?" He said to him, "Perish the thought, you shall not die. My father does nothing either great or small without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? Never." But David also swore, "Your father knows well that you like me, and he thinks, 'Do not let Jonathan know this, or he will be grieved.' But truly, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." David said to Jonathan, "Tomorrow, in the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at the meal. But let me go, so that I may hide in the field until the third evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, 'David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family.' If he says, 'Good,' it will be well for your servant. But if he is angry, then know that evil has been determined by him. Therefore, deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a sacred covenant with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself. Why should you bring me to your father?" Jonathan said, "Far be it from you. If I kept that it was decided by my father that evil should come upon you, would I not tell you?" Then David said to Jonathan, "Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly?" Jonathan replied to David, "Come, let us go into the field." So they both went out into the field. Jonathan said to David, "By the Lord, the God of Israel, when I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow, or on the third day, if he is well disposed toward David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? But if my father intends to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan, and more also, if I do not disclose it to you, and send you away, so that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the faithful love of the Lord. But if I die, never cut off your faithful love from my house, even if the Lord were to cut off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth." Thus Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord seek out the enemies of David." Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, and he joined him as he loved his own, and he loved him as he loved his own life. So again, we see the true friendship of Jonathan and David, and that's what this should be interpreted as true friendship. A lot of modern ones, and we've talked about this before, try to interpret this with more modern vision, and that was clearly not the vision that the author intended. It was clearly not the vision that any Hebrews would have read into this. They see this as a pure friendship and a devotedness. So this is kind of like soldiers in war together, or Frodo and Bilbo, or Frodo and Samwise, where you have the two parties coming together and devoting themselves together in this dangerous time. And so they're like, well, what happens to you happens to me. And so there's that kind, again, that soldier mentality. And so that's kind of how we're supposed to be reading this. And again, so Jonathan is willing to take the punishment, and he recognizes that great things are expected of David. So he says, you're faithful to God. God has blessed you. So you have to be faithful to me, though. Make sure that while my father might be your enemy, I'm not your enemy. And so you have to promise me to preserve my line, because God's going to take out all your enemies. So that means he's probably taking out my dad, and I might end up going with him. But you have to promise to preserve my line and to be good to my line, to my future generations. And of course, David agrees to that. So this is that commitment they have to each other to protect each other in this dangerous time. Jonathan said to him, "Tomorrow is the new moon. You will be missed because your place will be empty. On the day after tomorrow, you shall go a long way down. Go to the place where you hid yourself earlier and remain beside the stone there. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shot at a mark. Then I will send the boy, saying, 'Go find the arrows.' If I say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows on this side of you, collect them,' then you are to come, for as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the young man, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then go, for the Lord has sent you away. As for the matter about which you and I have spoken, the Lord is witness between you and me forever." So David hid him in the field. When the new moon came, the king sat at the feast to eat. The king sat upon his seat, and as other times upon the seat by the wall. Jonathan stood while Abner sat at Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, "Something has befallen him. He is not clean. Surely he is not clean." But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty, and Saul said to his son Jonathan, "Why has the son of Jesse not come to the feast, either yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered Saul, "David earnestly asked to leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go, for our family is holding a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your sight, let me get away and see my brothers. For that reason he has not come to the king's table.'" Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. He said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives upon the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Now send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." Then Jonathan answered his father Saul, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" But Saul threw his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that it was the decision of his father to put David to death. Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food on the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David and because his father had disgraced him. So now you can see him not eating at the table is basically a rejection of his house. And so he's kind of like taking himself away because he's like, "I won't be part of this. I'm not going to be part of your machinations." And so we obviously see Saul's anger is laid bare, his plotting is laid bare, and his jealousy is laid bare because, of course, David hasn't done anything to take the kingdom. And, of course, this is like that divine irony is that Saul's defeat will ultimately be of his own doing. And that's a big thing, that David does not force God's hand. He allows it to play out. And so Saul will be he'll be the force of his own unmaking. In the morning, Jonathan went out into the field to the appointment with David, and with him was a little boy. He said to the boy, "Run and find the arrows that I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. Then the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen. Jonathan called after the boy and said, "Is the arrow not beyond you?" Jonathan called after the boy, "Hurry, be quick, do not linger." So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the boy knew nothing, only Jonathan and David knew the arrangement. Jonathan gave his weapon to the boy and said to him, "Go and carry them to the city." As soon as the boy was gone, David rose from beyond the stone heap and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He bowed 3 times, and they kissed each other and wept with each other. David wept the more. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, since both of us have sworn in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my descendants and your descendants forever.'" He got up and left, and Jonathan went into the city. David came to Nob to the priest Ahimelech. Ahimelech came trembling to meet David and said to him, "Why are you alone?" and no one with you?" David said to the priest Ahimelech, "The king has charged me with a matter and said to me, 'No one must know anything of the matter about which I send you, with which I have charged you. I have made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. Now then, what have you at hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever is here.'" The priest answered David, "I have no ordinary bread at hand, only holy bread, provided that the young men have kept themselves from women." David answered the priest, "Indeed, women have been kept from us always when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy, even when it is a common journey. How much more today will their vessels be holy?" So the priest gave him the holy bread. So there was no bread there except the bread of the presence, which was removed before the Lord to be replaced by hot bread on the day it is taken away. So, of course, this little part of the story is referred to by Jesus himself and things when we were talking about being overly liturgical or overly legalistic. This is one of those cases where it's like technically only the priests are supposed to eat the holy bread, but it's like, but if you're okay and if you're ritually clean, we can kind of make the exception. And so he makes the exception. And so this is, again, Jesus, remember, is when he's telling them, it's like, didn't David go and take the holy bread of the presence? And of course, not that this is the main thrust of the story, but we've talked about how they had the holy bread of the presence, which marked the presence of God. And of course, it's a foreshadowing of the Eucharist. And so when he's about to go on his dangerous journey, he goes and receives a symbol of the Eucharist, the holy bread, to prepare himself for this sacred journey. And then he arms himself right after that. So with the bread, then he arms himself, as we're just about to see. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg, the Edomite, the chief of Saul's shepherds. David said to Ahimelech, "Is there no spear or sword here with you? I did not bring my sword or my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." The priest said, "The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take that, take it, for there is none here except that one." David said, "There is none like it, give it to me." So this is kind of a coming of full circle. So he had given up the sword because it wasn't really his place and he was too young to bear it. Now he's older, he's wiser, he's strong enough to bear the sword that was rightfully his from the beginning. So not only has he received food from the journey, but now he is physically armed to match his spiritual armament to prepare for this long journey, having to be on the run from Saul. David rose and fled that day from Saul. He went to King Achish of Gath. The servant of Achish said to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s." David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of King Achish of Gath. So he changed his behavior before them. He pretended to be mad when in their presence. He scratched marks on the door of the gate and let his spittle run down his beard. Achish said to his servants, "Look, you see the man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? Do I lack madman, that you have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?" So again, he's kind of on the road, and now he has seen someone who remembers him, and that's almost dangerous because he now has this history of killing lots of Israel's enemies, and that's not always good now that he has to be among them. And so he kind of plays the fool so that he won't get killed and get rejected out of hand. David left there and escaped to the cave of Adulum, where his brothers and all his father's house heard of it. They went down there to him. Everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. Those who were with him numbered about 400. This is kind of like a precursor, like a Robin Hood. So it's like, whenever you have the guy on the run, so you have like the noble discontents. So you have those in debt and those who can't be in normal society. And so it's that kind of same idea, like, oh, well, they're even though they're the outskirts and they're rebels and rascals, they have that kind of noble scallywag kind of thing going on here. And that's the vibe that we're getting for David. So, okay, who's he going to be the king of? He's going to be the king of these miscontents and things like that. And again, we've seen God work constantly through the unexpected. And so it's that same idea. He's going to work through the debtors and the discontented and through those in distress. And that's who God's going to work through. So he's not going to work through the highest. He's going to work through the lowly. David went from there to Mizpah of Moab. He said to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and mother come to you until I know that God will do with me." He left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not remain in the stronghold. Leave and go into the land of Judah." So David left and went into the forest of Hereth. So he's going home. So he's even in the forest like Robin Hood. This is that period. So he's in the wilderness. He's not allowed to be in polite society, so he has to kind of be that rebel without a cause kind of thing. Saul heard that David and those who were with him had been located. Saul was sitting in Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height, with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing around him. Saul said to his servants who stood around him, "Hear now, you Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of your fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why all of you have conspired against me? No one disclosed to me when my son makes a league with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up the servants against me to lie in wait, and he is doing today." Doeg the Edomite, who was in charge of Saul's servants, answered, "I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub. He inquired of the Lord for him and gave him provisions and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. The king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and for all of the father's house, the priests who were at Nob, and all of them came to the king. Saul said, "Listen now, son of Ahitub." He answered, "Here I am, my lord." Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, by giving him bread and a sword, and by inquiring of God for him, so that he has risen against me to lie in wait, as he is doing today?" Then Ahimelech answered the Lord, "Who among all of your servants is so faithful as David? He is the king's son-in-law, and is quick to do your bidding, and is honored in your house. And is today the first time that I have inquired of God for him? By no means. Do not let the king impute anything to his servant or to any member of my father's house, for your servant has known nothing of all this, much or little." The king said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." The king said to the guard who stood around him, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David. They knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me." But the servants of the king would not raise their hand to attack the priests of the Lord. Then the king said to Doeg, "You, Doeg, turn and attack the priests." Doeg the Edomite turned and attacked the priests. On that day he killed 85 who wore the linen ephod. Nob, the city of the priests, he put to the sword. Men and women, children and infants, oxen, donkeys, and sheep he put to the sword. But one of the sons of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day that Doeg the Edomite was there, and he would likely tell Saul, I am responsible for the lives of all your father's house. Stay with me and do not be afraid, for the one who seeks my life seeks your life. You will stay with me. So this is the scene in the movie that you have that establishes the villain. So if you think of this is Darth Vader blowing up Alderaan in the first Star Wars. This is the thing where it's you know how it's going to play out. You have Doeg, who becomes kind of like the worm tongue figure. He has the little toady who's going to just trying to climb up and follow the path of power. And so it even plays out beat for beat. You have the innocent priest who was just doing what he thought was best. He doesn't understand the situation, and of course Saul doesn't care. He says, "You've betrayed me," and he's just I thought I was serving you, and so it doesn't matter though. So he has them, and even the guards don't want anything part of it, and so you can see that hesitation again. This is played out in countless movies, and you have the villain kill them, and they're fine, do it yourself, and then this one guy does it, and so you can see how it's building up. And then not only that, he doesn't just kill the one guy, he kills his whole family and his whole town. And so this is a point of no return. There's no redemption for Saul after this point. He is just a pure villain. When you kill a whole town, when you kill a priest who is only doing what was right in his eyes and only trying to serve Saul, then it's a failure. You could also see this as a critique on David lying too, because David lied, and so David's lie kind of comes back to haunt him, because if he had said the truth to Ahimelech, then Ahimelech may have answered Saul differently, and it might have played out differently. So when David says, "This is my fault," there's some truth to that. He could have handled the situation better, and if he hadn't lied about the situation, then maybe it would have played out differently, and maybe it would have been better. So is it the majority his fault? No. But again, you're seeing David take the blame, and that's going to be a recurring theme of when David makes a mistake, he admits it. And that's one of the difference between him and Saul. Saul doesn't admit his mistakes. Remember when he took all the gold and the oxen for himself? He's like, oh, well, they're going to be for the Lord, and he never admitted the problem. He never admits that he's made a mistake. Here, David is already different. He's taking the blame. He's willing to admit his mistakes. So it's the big difference between the two. Okay, and now we've seen Saul destroy a city. Now we're going to see David save a city. So it's, again, all these stories are to show the juxtaposition between David and Saul, who will be the good king versus the bad king. Now they told David, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors. David inquired with the Lord, shall I go and attack the Philistines? The Lord said to David, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, look, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more than if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? Then David inquired of the Lord again, and the Lord asked him, yes, go down to Keilah, for I will drive the Philistines into your hands. So David and his men went to Keilah, fought with the Philistines, brought away their livestock, and dealt them a heavy defeat. Thus David rescued the inhabitants of Keilah. So now again, the juxtaposition is Saul destroys a city, which he's supposed to be protecting, and now David is protecting a city which Saul should be doing. Saul's the one who's supposed to be fighting the Philistines as the king. It's his job to defend Israel in this town, but he's not doing it. So David is already, even though he's not the king yet, he's already acting in the kingly role. He's acting as the leader of the army. He's acting in that protective, fatherly, defensive role. So this is kind of that juxtaposition between the two, and we see David already taking on the responsibilities of kingship. Then Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah. He came down with an ephod in his hand. Now it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah, and Saul said, God has given him into my hands, for he has shut himself in by entering a town with the gates and bars. Saul summoned all the people of war to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. When David learned that Saul was plotting evil against him, he said to the priest Abiathar, bring the ephod here. David said, O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. And now will Saul come down as your servant has heard. O Lord, the God of Israel, I beseech you, tell your servant, the Lord said, he will come down. Then David said, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men to the hand of Saul? The Lord said, they will surrender you. Then David and his men, who were about 600, so they're growing. Remember, last time they were 400, now they're up to 600. Men into the hand, about 600, set out and left Keilah. They wandered wherever they could go. Then Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah. He gave up the expedition. David remained in the strongholds in the wilderness, in the hill country, in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul sought him every day, but the Lord did not give him into his hand. David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh, where when he learned that Saul had come out to seek his life, Saul's son Jonathan set out and came to David at Horesh. There he strengthened his hand through the Lord. He said to him, do not be afraid, for the hand of my father Saul shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be second to you. My father Saul also knows that this is so. Then the two of them made a covenant before the Lord. David remained at Horesh, and Jonathan went home. So again, you see that Jonathan, this is an important note because Jonathan is willing to give up what should be rightfully his. He's like, no, you're going to be king. I'm okay with it. It's fine. And so this is important for us because it's like, okay, he's okay with not being king. David isn't stealing anything from Jonathan. Jonathan doesn't want this because he doesn't want anything to do, he doesn't want anything from his father. He's rejected his father's inheritance. He knows David will be better, so okay. So that's an important marker for us. So David is able to take it then without any guilt or any shame. Then some Ziphites went up to Saul at Gibesh and said, David is hiding among us in the strongholds of Horesh, on the hill of Hachilah, which is south of Jeshimon. Now, O king, whenever you wish to come down, do so, and our part will be to surrender him into the king's hand. Saul said, may you be blessed by the Lord for showing me compassion. So again, in the movie, when you have the people who you think are going to be his protectors, it turns out they're betraying him. So it's again, these are all campfire stories in that saying, like this is the episode, or it's like, oh, is David going to escape? Oh, he escapes just in time. And so of course, this is the bare bones. You can just imagine that during the time, they probably had much more fleshed out versions of these stories with narrow escapes and great adventures and all that kind of stuff. So it's like the Lone Ranger escaping at the last minute and all that kind of stuff. Robin Hood is probably the best example. It has very strong Robin Hood vibes. Okay. Go and make sure once more, find out exactly where he is and who has seen him. For I am told that he is very cunning. Look around and learn all the hiding places where he lurks, and come back to me with sure information. Then I will go with you, and if he is in the land, I will search him out among all the thousands of Judah. So they set out and went to Ziph ahead of Saul. David and his men were in the wilderness in Maon, in the Arabah, to the south of Jeshimon. Saul said to his men, went and searched for him. Then David was told, it went down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. When Saul heard that, he pursued David into the wilderness of Maon. Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. David was hurrying to get away from Saul, while Saul and his men were closing in on David and his men to capture them. Then a messenger came to Saul, saying, hurry and come, for the Philistines have made a raid on the land. So Saul stopped pursuing David and went against the Philistines. Therefore, the place was called the Rock of Escape. David then went up from there and lived in the stronghold of the En-Gedi. So David just narrowly escapes. So then we're going to see the next section is the first of David sparing Saul. So we'll read this next chapter, and then we'll probably end there. So when Saul returned from the Philistines, he was told, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Then Saul took the 1,000 chosen men out of all of Israel and went to look for David and his men in the direction of the rocks of the wild goats. So just a reminder, too, that Saul is doing this completely out of jealousy, and David hasn't done anything to provoke this except be a faithful servant. And this is just going to be more proof of that faithful servant, that he is a faithful servant, even to an undeserving master. He came to the sheepfolds besides the road, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. The men of David said to him, "Here in this day of which the Lord said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you." Then David went and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's cloak. Afterwards, David was stricken to the heart because he had cut off a corner of Saul's cloak. He said to the men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to the Lord's anointed, to raise my hand against him, for he is the Lord's anointed." So David scolded his men severely and did not permit them to attack Saul. Then Saul got up and left the cave and went on his way. Again, this is supposed to be a little comedic. So there's Saul relieving himself in the cave, and it just so happens to be the cave that David is hiding in. And you can just see, again, if it was the movie, you'd see Saul up against the wall, and it just pans over, and you see David, in the corner with his men, shh. And then they sneak up and, cut off a little piece. I mean, it's supposed to be comedic. This is supposed to make that, it's supposed to be funny. Afterwards, David also rose up and went out of the cave and called after Saul, "My lord, the king." Then Saul looked behind him. David bowed with his face to the ground and did obeisance. David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of those who say David seeks to do you harm? This very day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you into my hand in the cave, and some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not raise my hand against the Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your cloak in my hand. For the fact that I cut off the corner of your cloak and did not kill you, you may know for a certain that there is no wrong or treason in my hand. I have not sinned against you, though you are hunting me to take my life. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the ancient proverb says, out of the wicked comes forth wickedness. Out of my hand shall not be against you. Against whom the king of Israel coming out? Whom do you pursue? A dead dog, a single flea? May the Lord therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you. May he see to it and plead my cause and vindicate me against you." So while David does reemphasize, I'm not doing this, he does kind of give Saul a talking to in that he's like, hey, I haven't done anything. You're going to be judged by the Lord. So it's one way or the other. This is on you. I'm not doing it. But if you are going to keep pursuing me, the Lord is going to judge you. He gave me into your hands once. He can do it again. Then David had finished speaking these words to Saul. Saul said, "Is that your voice, my son David?" Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. Today you have explained how you have dealt well with me, and in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For who has ever found an enemy and sent the enemy safely away? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day." So again, this is one of those ironic moments of he kind of has to say it, but it's okay. God's going to reward you. He's going to reward you in the same way that he cursed Jonathan, and that's going to come around. So he blesses David, and that's going to come around as well. "Now I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not wipe my name from my father's house." So David swore to Israel. Then Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. So even Saul recognizes that this is not going well. And this is not going well for him at all. And so he might just be saying these words nicely because he's surrounded by men and they probably wouldn't appreciate it if he betrayed David at this time. But even he recognizes that this is not going well. So this is definitely a big victory for David. Okay. We're just going to do a real quick. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him. They buried him in his home in Ramah. Then David got up and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Okay, so we're gonna stop there for the time because next time we have Abigail, which is a great story. Abigail is great. So just in the final note is so David is again being the bigger man, being the blessed. He's willing to take on the harder route, the longer route. He got an easy way out. He could have killed Saul, but he doesn't take the easy way out because that was Saul. Saul took the easy way out. Remember when Samuel was running late and he just did it himself? Okay, this is David not taking that way. He's not taking the easy way out. He's being patient. He's letting the Lord work. And so that's the juxtaposition. So we're going to continue to see the responsibility shift towards David and then shift away from Saul. And we're going to see Saul continue to bring about his own doom. And that's going to be, the irony is. So he's like, don't cut off my descendants. And we'll see that Saul will be the cause of his own descendants' death. Okay. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Good night, everybody.